Hello, I'm delighted to be joined today by Kirsten Hund, Head of Carbon Neutrality at De Beers Group and also valued member of the Mining Indaba Sustainability Committee. Kirsten, delighted to have you here today.
Thanks for having me.
Kirsten, I wanted to start by asking how are De Beers responding to the industry's impact on climate change?
It's an interesting one, and De Beers is an interesting company in that sense, right? Because we are a mining company, but we're also very much a jewelry brand and a consumer-facing company. So even more than, say, a copper miner or an iron ore miner, we are directly exposed to consumer pressure and consumer demand to do the right thing and to sell a product that is truly green and sustainable. And I think because of that, obviously because we want to do the right thing and we are a corporate citizen, so we have a role to play in what is, I think, the biggest challenge of our times, fighting climate change. But also because we got to get very clear demand from our consumers. So we have set a very ambitious target to be carbon neutral for Scope 1 and 2, so our direct emissions by 2030. And well, I've spent the last 3 years in De Beers on really developing together with all the teams and all the different business units to develop a strategy. And our approach to that is, basically 3 pillars: reduce, replace, remove. Whereby reduce is about efficiency, which is I'd say the non-sexy fighting climate change tool, right? It isn't to an extent the low-hanging fruit. It's about turning off the lights and turning off the engines and really operating in such a way that you use as little energy as possible. There's lots of innovation happening in that space, but it's also behavioral. And in that sense, it's almost the most difficult one because you ask people to do what they were always doing, but then in a more efficient or slightly different manner. So reduce is the first one. Replace is about replacing fossil fuels and fossil-based electricity. Our mines are largely in Southern Africa, where the grid energy comes from coal-fired power plants. So that is, the emissions are very high. So we need to develop renewable electricity, solar and wind. We are lucky that in our side of the world, the wind blows a lot and obviously the sun shines a lot as well. So there's really good renewable resources. So we're working very closely with Anglo American, our mother company, to develop solar and wind at and around our mine sites. And the other side is of replace, and I think that's the biggest challenge for the mining industry, is replacing fossil-based fuels. Looking at electrification of equipment, but also at alternative fuels, biofuels, green hydrogen, things like that. And then the last part, the remove, really is like once we have done everything we can to bring down our carbon footprint to the absolute maximum, we will invest in nature-based carbon solutions to remove carbon from the atmosphere, where we are really looking at, okay, what kind of project can we do in the countries where we operate, ideally close to the communities where we operate, to invest in projects that create jobs, promote biodiversity, and remove carbon. And one example there that I am personally very fond of is an investment we made into Kelp Blue, which is a company that plants giant seaweed off the coast of Namibia and Lüderitz. They harvest the giant seaweed kelp to make biostimulants and other products out of it. But that seaweed also really has the capacity to sequester an immense amount of carbon. And that is one of those projects, I think that is a win-win. It creates local jobs. It really helps stimulate ocean biodiversity. It really helps build local skills, etc. And it helps remove carbon from the atmosphere. And we're really looking at, can we do more of those kind of projects to remove carbon from the atmosphere? So that's our strategy. We're still in early stages of rolling it out, but I'm pretty confident we'll get there.
It's a really interesting strategy, and you actually touched on this a little bit in a few areas, but I'd like to ask, what do you see as the biggest challenges in not achieving your targets?
There's quite a few. I think renewable energy, in a way, we know that, right? I think the world by now knows how to develop solar energy and how to develop wind energy. The technical side there we fixed. I think there's still a lot of issues to solve around capacity and to some extent regulatory challenges. This is a new area for a lot of governments in the countries where we operate. And I think everybody is still trying to figure out how exactly to regulate it, whether to let mining companies build and generate their own electricity, of whether that needs to go through national power companies. Grid capacity is a real issue in the countries where we operate. If the grid doesn't have the capacity to accommodate all the new electricity that mining companies require. And another one, and especially in the fuel replacement space, is technological advancement. We do not, at the moment, I think it's 1 or 2% of all mining equipment, large scale mining equipment, that is electrified. Renewable alternative fuels are hardly available in Africa. There's lots of innovation and development happening in that space, but it's not happening fast enough. We cannot right now buy at a large and economic scale electric mining trucks. We also cannot locally buy economically viable clean fuels. So we're looking at what can we develop ourselves, who can we collaborate with to do that. And I think partnerships are definitely the way to go in this field, but that's definitely an area where much faster innovation needs to happen.
Would you be able to give me a more overall overview or an update on the current landscape of mining and climate action?
There's a lot happening in this space, right? It's also a very big space. Mm-hmm. I think, there's a difference. There's mining. Mining is responsible, and the numbers differ, right? But I think mining globally, and I'm excluding coal because I think that's a completely different category. But all other kinds of mining contribute anything between 5 and 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions. But the large majority of that come from the smelting and processing of ore, which, lucky for us, is not an issue for diamonds, but which is obviously a massive issue for steel making, things like that. So I think in that space, there's lots happening around green steel, for example, which is really interesting, and which is an area which is developing very fast. Cement, same thing. Obviously, they have a massive carbon problem, and I think lots of innovation is happening there. I think in general in this space, and I don't know who said it, but I've heard it quite a few times now recently, that it's actually cheaper to save the world than to destroy it. I think everybody can see that renewable electricity is cheaper, being efficient is cheaper, and in a way, the increasing fuel and gas prices, etc., have been a boost for the industry, because we all had to, even for those that did not necessarily care so much about climate change, everybody has had to look at ways to save energy, simply to save costs and to be more efficient and save their operations. So that has really made a change. So I think the large majority is looking at renewable electricity and efficiency. And I think the other trend is really the trend around Scope 3 indirect emissions, which are, I think, 90% of when we talk about look at the carbon footprint of mining, 90% is Scope 3, which are the emissions from both upstream and downstream, the goods that you purchase that are used in your mine, but also the emissions from the downstream use of your product. Again, for diamonds, we're lucky that the use of a diamond, that there's no real emissions associated with the use of a diamond, but we have a significant amount of our emissions upstream in I don't know, the cement and steel that we use in our mines, the cutting and polishing of a diamond, etc. And that is not, those emissions, those Scope 3 emissions are not something you can just, it doesn't depend on our decision, right, to reduce those emissions. So that there, it really requires on dialogues and partnerships to really work with suppliers. And we're in the process, again, together with Anglo, to sign MOUs with the top 10 main suppliers to really look at, okay, how can they reduce their carbon footprint? And sometimes that means helping them, right? Looking at, okay, what alternative forms of energy can we find, but also providing technical assistance to smaller suppliers, or in our case, people that do the cutting and polishing of diamonds, like what do they need and how can we provide technical support to think through more efficient and more low carbon, less energy intensive ways to do what they're doing. And I think, again, that is a rapidly evolving space.
Do you think that mining has the capability to reduce its footprint at the pace that's required?
I think we all, every single one of us needs to go so much faster to reduce carbon emissions in the world than any one of us is doing, because doing what needs to be done to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees will require the world to make tough choices, and I'm not sure people are really prepared to make those tough choices. I do think there's a lot of change happening at this point in time, and lots of people are trying. Lots of mining companies have set targets, be it for 2030, 40 or 50. Are they always as ambitious as one would want for the sake of the world? I'm not sure. I do think there's lots of people out there that are extremely committed. The ICMM has been doing really good work providing guidance on scope 1, 2, and 3. All ICMM members have made commitments. But do we need to accelerate? Yes, I think that's. So my short answer would be no, but I do think there's hope.
But you kind of answered my next question there, which is going to be, is the mining industry doing enough? But you seem to be of the opinion that they're not, but there's hope on the horizon.
Yeah, I think everybody's trying. I think people are also realizing, as I said, that a lot of it just makes business sense to do. I think it is challenging. I think the mining industry, almost by nature, doesn't really like change. And change goes slow, simply because, in the heart of the industry, we're moving massive rocks with very big machines. It's not a very fast and dynamic process, right? So to change that requires technological change, but also a real change in mindset and cultures. And that is a slow process, but I do think it's happening.
So it's really interesting. I'd like to end the interview with a bit more of a slightly different question, which is, do you see any disruptive developments on the horizon that you think will have a large positive impact for the mining industry?
Well, lots. I think the one that I see is the whole provenance discussion that I see, right? Where it becomes easier and easier, and when we're piloting that in the beers with Tracer, like it becomes easier and easier to follow the actual footprint of a product and to really see from end to end what the carbon footprint, but even also a water footprint or an impact on deforestation, or even a contribution in terms of tax, etc., a product has made. And I think that the fact that becomes so much easier, and that at some point a consumer will be able to see from a product it buys, be it a car battery or a diamond, really where it comes from and what the impact has been. That level of transparency will be a game changer and will really help. And not just for consumers, right? I also think inside an industry, if you can really follow all those different steps, that is a game changer. I think the fact that in particular, EV companies are becoming more and more interested and start to develop direct links with the mining industry, because they want to know if they sell a green product, they want to know where the natural resources for that product came from. I think that is a game changer for the industry, because it really requires the mining sector to think very differently about where it came from. I think carbon markets are going to be a big changer as well. Putting an actual real price on carbon, be it through a voluntary carbon market that works and is trustworthy, or through a global price on carbon. But I think the moment we start putting a real price on carbon and really know and start measuring and start putting a financial measure on our carbon footprint, I think that will be a real game changer. And it's happening here and there in different corners, but it's obviously not universally applied. But I think we might be moving in that direction. That will be a real game changer.
It's really exciting that your first word you said to that question was lots. So lots of interesting stuff there. And Kirsten, I'd just like to say thank you so much for joining. It's been a really interesting discussion.
Happy to. Thanks. It's yeah, there's so much to be said here.
And thanks everyone for tuning in.